my name is Mykaela Chaffin, and my research essay was over duality and power in Shakespeare's Richard II. This is an image of my full poster, but to start with, we'll go over background. Duality is a common theme in William Shakespeare's work. Sometimes, characters exemplify only one side of their dual nature to contrast other characters, such as the trope of women falling victim to the whore Madonna complex. Other times, we witness character transformations into opposite natures, such as Othello's transformation from man to beast. While we usually simplify characters as representing one trait at a time, there is the idea that virtue is in the middle. To fully quote Aristotle's theory, virtue, is a mean because the vices respectively fall short of or exceed what is right in both passions and actions, while virtue both finds and chooses that which is intermediate. So, in terms of duality, if one wanted to have virtue, they would not have more of one side than the other, rather both sides evenly and completely. According to Richard Harp, a professor at the University of Nevada, quote, "The traditional idea of virtue had to do with power," end quote. So it would make sense that if one could find a balance in their duality, they would achieve and retain power. We see a great example of virtue in Henry IV, where Hal represents the center between traditional and revolutionary kingship. His ability to speak to the common man while retaining his grace as king is a show of his virtuous nature. This is why he is able to achieve and retain power so well. However, when we look back to Richard II, there are obvious imbalances in virtues. Richard II is supposed to be king and man, his duality shown in the traditional idea of the king's two bodies. Yet, his greed teeters him precariously toward full king, divine and above all. His inability to feel as a man until it is too late is what causes his failed leadership. To conclude on this slide, my thesis for this research paper is characters who are able to control their duality, or find virtue in the middle, are the ones who achieve and retain power most effectively. For evidence, these are 3 quotes I have chosen to exemplify my claim. The first is from the play Richard II by the Duke of York. Here York is comparing Edward III, Richard II's predecessor, to Richard. York claims that Edward had the duality of a lion and a lamb, and properly balanced the two extremes. Richard, however, has the vices of the excess of lion and defect of lamb. This is one example of his lack of virtue. The second is also from Richard II, and is quoted by John of Gaunt. This also shows Richard II's excess of blazing kingship. He says that violent fires soon burn themselves out, meaning that without virtue, Richard II will not be able to retain his power. The final quote is from F.W. Maitland in the Constitutional History of England. He says, quote, "The crown is a convenient cover for ignorance. It saves us from asking difficult questions. Do not be content until you know who legally has the power. Is it the king? Is it one of his secretaries? Is this power prerogative power, or is it the outcome of statute?" End quote. In the beginning, we do see Richard have, in a sense, power. But we also see characters around him manipulate his choices. Richard does not make the best decisions, so his power is more obligated from his position rather than actual true power. In conclusion, Richard II's dual nature was imbalanced. To go back to the king's two bodies idea, he could not balance between his body politic and body natural, as well as he couldn't balance between traditional and revolutionary kingship. Therefore, he was not virtuous, and because of that, he lost his power. We can also apply this to other Shakespearean characters. We've already mentioned Hal, but following Richard II, we have Henry IV, who also lost his power. This was because he was the opposite of Richard II, and thus he lost his power and Hal took over. There are other examples, like Macbeth, King Lear, and Othello, but overall, this theory can be applied to many characters. Thank you for listening to my presentation.